Hello, and Carl Monson here of the Portugal Club, of the Good Morning Portugal show, of course, in the mornings. Catch us at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that's an hour of the lighter side of life here in Portugal, and special guests and co-hosts. And it's upbeat, it's positive and informative in the mornings. I think this will be too, Portugal Club. Not exactly a webinar, but a presentation, a conversation, but on a slightly different wavelength. And by that, I mean beyond our normal algorithms. And I wanted to have conversations which could be described as difficult and awkward conversations about hot button topics. And of course, our guest tonight and the party he belongs to represents fit into that category. And the question we're asking tonight is, should foreigners fear CHEGA? And of course, you'll be if you live in Portugal as a foreigner, it would have been very hard to escape. Well, escape's probably not the right word, but you'll have certainly heard of CHEGA, and you'll be subject to the local election campaign at the moment, with vehicles driving around your locality, playing music, blaring their horns. And I notice a lot of parties have got AI-generated theme tunes as well, which I think is a new thing, must be a new thing with the advent of AI in political campaigning and canvassing at the moment. What I'd like to do tonight is I've got three, I suppose, outline areas of discussion that occur to me about the push button, the hot button topics, the things that might keep us in our echo chamber, the things that might divide us in quite a polar way, as we live in quite a polarized society, it would seem, exacerbated by social media. And that's the whole purpose of these conversations, is to try and get beyond that echo chamber idea and to maybe find ourselves in conversation as much as that's possible by putting questions and comments in the chat. I guess you could join us on the screen as well. But to maybe think outside our normal boxes and to approach subjects we might not feel comfortable about, we might find out we're misinformed about, but certainly to start by having a conversation in the first place. My ground rules, if you've watched Good Morning Portugal, that is to be legal, respectful, and polite in conversation. And there are three topics or three themes that I have been thinking about with regard to this particular conversation tonight. And that is the man, the manifesto, and the manipulation. That's quite mansplaining, isn't it? They all begin with man. We are speaking to a man tonight, and I know he'll have a view on gender. The topic of gender as well. But the reason I want to separate those three things is because I think they get overlapped with each other and they create an unholy mess when you're talking to the human being and then an ideological point comes in or something that you're triggered about comes in and you can't hear anymore. So I would advise or suggest that if you find yourself getting triggered or you find the conversation difficult, regulate, breathe, try seeing it from a different point of view, because this is not going to be a slagging match. This isn't going to be an idea of winning, debating, and overcoming any sense of an opponent. This is about trying to understand and maybe push our understanding, our personal understanding, as I say, beyond our curated algorithms of information, just a little bit further, a little bit more expanded, and for the benefit of humanity and humankind. And on that basis, let me bring to the screen, if I may, Miguel Nunes Silva of CHEGA, the representative in Irish, and he's also, you'll see here, the director of the Trezeno Institute, or the Instituto Trezeno as well. So good evening to you, Miguel. Great to see you. How are you this evening?
Good evening, Carl. I'm doing very well. How are you? How have you been for the past year?
Well, that's when we last saw each other. We were with the Portuguese, weren't we, watching the American election results? And fair to say, it's been quite a year since then. Not just for America, but high octane politics and geopolitical movements everywhere. It's hard to avoid that at the moment. I'm watching that closely and trying to enjoy a calm, pleasant, and a very enjoyable quality of life here in Portugal. So to answer your question, loving Portugal, whilst keeping an eye on what's going on. And there's no escape from politics at the moment. As I said, the local elections are coming up, aren't they, at the moment? And you're involved in that. Do you want to tell us about your involvement with that in the first instance, the local elections, and you're being the CHEGA representative, and then put that in a bigger context of how you're involved with the party?
Happy to. Full disclosure and just a caveat, I speak for myself, not for the party.
Okay.
That goes without saying. Now, I am running for re-election because I was elected into the parish council. I think would be the closest definition in the UK.
Yeah.
In 2021. 4 years later, there's another term, and I'm now running for re-election in the same body. This time, however, things are quite different for us. On one hand, because the party has grown exponentially since 2021, we're now the second largest party, and as a result, in the local elections, we also expect to have a much better result, and that would mean having a group, a parliamentary group in every local organ, every local body of representatives. Also because Oasis is a special situation. We don't have all the normal parties that you would have in the national parliament because we have an independent movement led by a mayor, a man who's been the mayor for 40 years. And so the dynamics are a bit different in Oasis. And so, for example, here we will not have PSD or CDS running.
Really?
And the left bloc and Livre, or the Free Party, they do run together in a coalition.
That is unusual, isn't it? That's
dynamics are a bit different.
Yes. And why is that? I mean, there's already so much I want to ask you about that, but why is that? And how do you get to be mayor for 40 years?
Well, the mayor, his name is Isaltino Moraes. He used to be a member of PSD. In the 80s, he was chosen to run for Oeiras. At the time, it was not a particularly developed area of Lisbon, but it was already an area that had a number of wealthy people with some estates here, not as much as in Cascais, but somewhere in between. And it also had a number of what we call retornados, or the returnees, so the people who escaped the colonies after the decolonization process, and also military retirees. They were also moving into this suburb of Lisbon. But what Isaltino did was he was very cunning. He basically gave tax benefits to multinational companies who were seeking to move to Portugal. So many of them settled in Oeiras, in the Oeiras municipality. In the meantime, Oeiras and Amadora, you might have heard of Amadora.
Yes.
They used to be together. They used to be the same municipality, but Amadora seceded. So basically, Oeiras was left with all the rich parts, all the rich businesses, and Amadora was left with all the high African immigration areas. And so, as you can imagine, the development of one and the other are radically different. And at this point in time, Oeiras is the second richest municipality in Portugal after Lisbon. So, and this is because of all the multinational HQs that are based here. So actually, as a mayor, he has a budget of hundreds of millions of euros to play with on an annual basis. And as a result of that, of course, he has been able to invest greatly in the municipality and to be able to subsidize a number of things. And so that has, for the past 40 years, granted him high levels of popularity.
Sure.
And as you can imagine, if you compare Oeiras to Cascais or Amadora or others, you do see higher levels of development, not necessarily richer people, but a bit more orderly. And so he has remained very popular. Now, the reason why this is in 2025, he's running for the last time. We now have term limits. We didn't used to have until the 2010s. We now have them. However, in the 2010s, this mayor was arrested for corruption. He went to prison. But because he went to prison, he came out a year later and it restarted. So now he gets to run another 3 times.
He's reborn. He's born again politician. That's cool.
One way to look.
That's quite a device, isn't it? And that answers Adrian's question there. So thank you for explaining that unique situation in Oeiras, which it sounds like he has. He's an ally. He's a good ally for the types of investors that have traditionally made AOS what it is today, and those larger companies that you've talked about. And I'm wondering why the political makeup is so different. Is it because they now see the other parties, that is, see the recumbent mayor who's going for his last term and CHEGA being head to head in a battle that will be won by either of the two? Is that why they're kind of stepping out the way?
Um, I would say if there's a rival to him, to the current mayor, it would be the CHEGA candidate, because he's an MP, he's relatively well known nationally, and CHEGA being the second largest party, we would have nominally, seemingly, good conditions to have a good result in Oeiras.
Yes.
But no, I don't think that's the reason why things have changed. The reason why PSD and CDS are not running is because Isaltino came from PSD. After he was arrested, he was forced to conjure up an independent citizens movement to be able to run again, because PSD wouldn't back him.
I see. Okay.
So for a number of years, for a number of election cycles, you had both PSD and Isaltino running in parallel, even though everyone knew, allegedly suspected, that Isaltino actually runs the local PSD branch anyway. But in this election, there was the real possibility that PSD would not be able to elect a councilman, a vereador, and therefore it would be a great humiliation for PSD. And so they just decided to include all the PSD members into Isaltino's own lists for the election. So they just merged.
So a little bit of a vignette or showcase of what can go on in local Portuguese politics there, a little bit of a cultural lesson for us perhaps there. Well, the best of luck to all the runners and riders in that particular area. Something else that I can pick up on from your opening comments there in introduction, and I realise this now, this is the first set of local elections since CHEGA have become the second most popular party in Portugal. That's correct, isn't it? So what do you see as a result of that? Is this country going to be surprised by the ground? And presumably you're hoping for a huge groundswell of grassroots local representation for CHEGA. Is that how you see it? Is that the surprise that's on the cards for next Sunday, or will you not be surprised to see that?
CHEGA made the decision, strategic or otherwise, the political decision, to run in every single municipality in the country. It is the only political party in Portugal to do so.
Yeah.
We are running in every single one. Now, how much we'll get in each one is another matter, but we will run in every single one. Now, the reason why I think is because symbolically we want to demonstrate that we are a national party. We're not just an agglomeration of small supported groups in Lisbon and the outskirts, like some smaller parties. We are a truly national party.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't expect the results to be, even though there's a poll going around that says that we will have more local politicians elected than the Socialist Party.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a projection. I'm not sure how true that would be. There are two things to consider. One, if people are voting nationally for a party the way they do for CHEGA, necessarily this will reflect on the local level as well. I mean, there is bound to be a base of support for CHEGA everywhere.
Yeah.
That being said, local elections are not national elections, and people vote very differently. So, for example, you can see here in Oeiras, people vote for Isaltino, even though his party is not a national party. They don't care about his party.
Yeah.
So they just vote for him. They vote for his name. And this
Yeah.
happens all throughout the country. And so far, CHEGA does not control a single city hall or city council. It doesn't control a single parish council. So, junta de freguesia. So there are no known faces or body of work that people can vote for when it comes to CHEGA representatives. So I think that CHEGA will have a great result, but that does not mean that it will be on par with PSD or PS nationally in terms of, say, the number of city halls controlled. That, I mean, we might elect a few, but not quite at the same level of the more ancient, more established parties in Portugal.
Which is, of course, who or what you're challenging. And I have to say, if I were the strategist of a new and very popular party, I would also be fielding candidates in every locality for the local. It just makes sense to do that, doesn't it? To measure the feeling and to catch any updraft politically in all the localities. But that's also news to me. I didn't realise there weren't any town halls or parish councils that were CHEGA run as yet. So in a way, any victory of that kind will be an improvement on the on the status quo at the moment, and it's just a matter of scale for that to see whether it's going to be a handful of new localities and cameras that are run by CHEGA, or if it's going to be a lot.
One other parenthesis, one other detail that one has to consider is that because there is a quarantine drawn around CHEGA, even if CHEGA were to, say, achieve the greatest number of the best result in a particular municipality, that would not prevent the other parties from forming a local government excluding CHEGA. So,
right.
So that does not grant us victories necessarily.
Oh, okay. Which kind of mirrors the parliament, then, doesn't it? Okay, in the way that the establishment seems to be reacting to the newcomers. Excellent. Okay. I mean, this is all very interesting information, and that's really how I hope this conversation would be. You know, we're here to discover things and to learn things beyond our prejudices and preconceived notions. And thank you for being here to do that. So it's going to be a very interesting Sunday, and by that I mean that's when the Portuguese people, will go to their local elections and be electing officials for the juntas de freguesia and the town halls. And then there's this other. Sorry, go ahead.
There are three ballots that people have to fill in.
Yeah.
One is for the city hall, the city council.
Yeah.
The other one is for the municipal assembly, which is a legislative body on the local level.
Okay.
And the other one is for the junta de freguesia, the parish council.
Oh, okay. And that's where I suppose those really human emotions and instincts come in, because, as you say, it's very relatable at that level, isn't it? If it's somebody you know and like or don't like, that might be reflected in their relative power of whether they're in the legislative body, or they're going to be running your local junta de freguesia, or they're going to be somewhat more remote in the camera level.
It's not just that. It also provides the possibility for people to vote for mayors that they like, but also for parties that they prefer on a lower level. So, for example, in Lisbon, the mayor at the moment, Carlos Moedas, he won the mayoral election, but his party does not have the absolute majority in the municipal assembly. So that means that he has to negotiate the budget every time, and the left has the majority, so they make it very difficult.
I've noticed, yes, he does walk on thin ice, doesn't he? And increasingly so, what one might say as well. And in that, so for instance, then you might vote for three different parties. You'll be identifying three people whose policies or approach you like, but they might come from three different parties, which is extraordinary, really, isn't it? And do you see that as a good thing? I mean, it sounds to me like that's democracy in action, in a very good way.
I can't judge. This is the only system I know. I can't compare.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I know two systems, I suppose, and this one seems. It's been fascinating to have some involvement with local politics and to be able to vote, which has met my original beef about the voting and electoral system in the United Kingdom. You know, I struggle with centralized politics. I think it's very unrepresentative, and then compare and contrast to people in my local cafe who are talking to me, who are representatives and inviting me to meetings to learn more about what they propose. it's the absolute opposite of what I'm used to, and I really appreciate it very much. But then again, I might have been disenfranchised and had a very different relationship to a cynical one in my native land. Right, we have Adrian joining us, Mel and Jackie with some great questions already. I do want to ask you as well about the what might be a bit of a curveball, or maybe it's a piece of genius political strategy. The leader of the CHEGA party, Andre Ventura, is also running for the presidential position, and that will be the third, or I don't know, one of the many elections we've had in the last 12 months. What is that going to do? How do you see that?
I don't think that we had much of a choice. If you follow the news, and by the way, I don't watch national news, but if you follow the news anyway, you might have noticed that CHEGA was very, very reluctant to present, to consider the candidacy. We thought through, or well, I would say Ventura thought it through for many months on what could be done. Because the problem is, in spite of the fact that we have now more well-known MPs, that does not necessarily mean that many people, well, whether they know them enough or whether they like them enough, to the extent of being able to present themselves for a presidential election. The presidential election has a very unique vibe in Portugal, something which I think you don't have in the UK, because you already have the king. We do not have a monarchy. So we do not have someone in high office that is supposed to have a statesman-like attitude, but also an objective, impartial approach.
Yeah.
So what tends to happen is that the political parties have someone either from their own ranks or someone who's well known in civil society to run for president. Normally, the person has somewhat closer views or similar views to those of the party in question, but they are widely regarded in society as someone who is respectable.
Yes.
So I don't know. For example, PSD might ask a former UN ambassador who's now a senior person to run for president, or say the Communist Party might ask a former leader of a trade union, or PS might ask a former head of the national charity organization, something like that.
Yes, yes.
Someone who's had a prominent role in civil society. It is someone who's loosely associated with that ideological view, but not necessarily a member of the party.
Yeah.
The problem with CHEGA is we're 7 years old. We don't have, civil society is against us. We don't have anyone in civil society. So the only people we could present would be someone from within our ranks. But then again, we are a relatively young party, not just legally, but we're a younger party in terms of also the age of the members, because we don't have senior figures in the party yet. So the only person that has a national role and who's nationally recognizable is Ventura himself. There would be no one else. Now, there are other names that were proposed, would be from the right, from the conservative right, but none of them had even remotely the level of name recognition that Ventura has.
Okay.
So we really didn't have much choice.
Just let me check something. So the political parties put a representative forward for the presidential post, do they?
No. Legally speaking, nominally speaking,
Yes.
the person, the individual presents himself.
Okay.
However, in order for you to be able to run for president, you have to present a certain number of signatures, over 7,000 signatures.
Okay.
That pretty much guarantees that only people with party support can do so. Because
Okay, understood. And so yeah, it's a parental figure, I suppose, isn't it? The father or mother of the nation stepping in to bang together the heads of the unruly parental class, if you like. And I suppose, yeah, Andre Ventura, perhaps in 30, if we'd move forward 30 years, he would have a different sort of stature in politics and be more representative in the way that you were describing there. But yes, he is the de facto presidential candidate. And how do you have a view on that? Do you have a view on the outcome? Because it's been a strange contest, hasn't it? Really, possibly over politicized, or maybe it always is. Maybe that's just my ignorance. But what do you? Perhaps you might speak of your hopes, but what do you think pragmatically will be the outcome of the presidential election?
Unpredictable.
Right.
Normally,
Is it especially difficult to call?
you remember we had a conversation the first time we spoke, and
Yes.
I was telling you the history of the election of the electoral system in Portugal. And so we
Yes.
used to have those same five parties, and normally PSD would have a prominent candidate, and PS would have a prominent candidate, and that would be the challenge. That would be the race. This time around, it's very different because we have a multitude of candidates. Some are party supported, others are not. There are new parties presenting candidates. It's a mess. I think from CHEGA, our goal is simply to get to the second round of the elections, which normally doesn't even happen. We already know in one round you solve the issue.
Oh,
But this time around, we'll most definitely have two rounds, and the goal of CHEGA is to reach the second round. Now, whether we win after that or not will be a different matter. But the one person that gives us the most chances of doing that is Ventura.
yes. Yeah.
So
Very
who will
interesting.
win? I don't know. I don't know. Also, because a number of the candidacies right now, they are not all of them are official. We know we have a relative good sense of who is interested in running, but not all of them have made it official yet.
Okay.
Some of them are actually waiting for the end of the local elections to announce.
Oh, interesting. I say all about timing then, and to see with the mood of the nation perhaps after the local election. Such a busy year politically, such a frenzied atmosphere, you might say. Again, I don't have many years to make a judgment on that, but this is pretty heady stuff, isn't it? Even for Portugal, the amount of political toing and froing and elections that we've had this year.
Listen, I told you again in our first conversation.
Yeah.
For 40 years, the system was very boring. We always had the same parties, and we knew what to expect from each one.
Yes.
So everything is in flux because everything is changing.
Yeah.
And you know the fact that you now have the party leading the far left is a new party. The party leading the right is a new party. The party leading the center is not a new party, but we have a sizable new party called the Liberal Initiative in the center. So
Yes.
everything is different, and I think it will be some time until the system restabilizes.
Yes.
And I'm as curious as you are to see what comes out at the end. But
Yeah, I am. I've been drawn into this. I came here for a quiet life, and it's certainly not that politically. Very interesting times, but of course, that's a reflection of what's going on in the world as well. Now, you've mentioned a couple of times our first conversation, and I tell people about the story of our first conversation, and it relates directly to the question, the main question of the evening, which we finally got around to. That's my fault. I'm sorry. I keep distracting you with things that catch my attention. And you came onto the Good Morning Portugal show to talk about. I think I put something on LinkedIn or Facebook and said, would there be a Portuguese person who'd come and explain to us foreigners how the political system works? And you very
and I
kindly
humbly volunteered.
you very kindly volunteered, and it's funny now to say this, and this is part of my own personal algorithm and prejudices, if you like. We got to the end of our conversation, and you very ably and informatively told us about the political system here in Portugal. And I said, "Oh, by the way, Miguel, which party do you belong to?" And you said, "Oh, I'm a CHEGA representative." And I think I nearly spat my tea because I was like, do you remember that? And have we spoken about this before? Yeah,
Yes,
and I was quite shocked because I wasn't expecting, quite the learned and and deep thinking. But and I'm sorry for that. I am, but I'm fessing that up. That is human nature. And it's part of this whole thing about should foreigners fear CHEGA or which bits or why, and that was my first. Oh, okay. I've just been maybe swallowed a mainstream narrative, the whole populist thing, all bad. That man bad, that party bad, and I was a bit embarrassed about that, and still am. But I think it's a useful point from which to discuss this because I don't think I'm alone in that, and I don't think CHEGA, or they have that problem, if you like, don't they? And that's part of why we're having this conversation this evening. So, what's your first instinct and answer on that basis, or connected with that, with this main question of the evening? Should foreigners fear CHEGA? Because I think, if I may speak for foreigners, we do have a fear and a reaction to the atmosphere of which CHEGA is undoubtedly a part, a political atmosphere. So, what was, when I first put that question to you, because you had a chance to think about it, what did you think? What was your first instinct?
It's actually not a difficult question. No, I'll tell you why. In Lisbon, I'm also a member of an expat network organization. And so I interact quite often. I don't know if I told you this before. I interact quite often with expats, mostly Anglophone, not exclusively, but many Americans, many British. And one of my frustrations, this is a cultural organization, has nothing to do with politics. It's just
Right.
a complete hobby, has unrelated at all completely to, in any way, to politics. But as it happens, I do happen to interact with quite a number of expats. And one of my frustrations is that these people, they come to Portugal like you, they want to escape their own countries. One has to wonder why. I imagine that they're not particularly fond of high taxes and high crime. And so they come to Portugal, which they think is a country with good climate and safety. And they certainly have, in the first few years, a leg up fiscally in tax benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see the appeal. But then I have to wonder, well, if you come to Portugal and your voting pattern doesn't change, then where's the empirical learning? You came from a place that had high taxes and high crime, and now you're voting for the exact same policies that turned that place into a high crime, high tax place. That
Yes.
makes no sense. I mean, to me, I mean, again, you correct me, you're the expert here, but
Yes.
I would guess if life didn't work for you where you came from,
Yes.
something went wrong, and now you're seeking for a second chance, and the thinking, the reasoning is you're going to repeat all the same mistakes again.
As in,
What's the point then?
support the political forces that created the problems in the country that you're
That's how I
escaping.
see it.
No,
That's
I
how
can't
I
argue with that. I can't argue with that general point. I really can't. And
So to answer the question,
yeah,
just in
yeah.
I'll let you go, but to answer the question, should foreigners fear CHEGA? Well, if you came to this country to change your life, then I would assume that you would be more fearful of where you came from rather than Portugal.
Yeah.
And I would argue, if you come to Portugal to implement the same policies that made your home country worse, then shouldn't I fear you rather than the other way around? Um,
Okay, excellent. Now, I won't answer that. I think it's obvious what my immediate response is to that, and I'll let others perhaps unpack that and deal with that. And I'm trying to think for myself. You know, there's messaging. You know, CHEGA messaging that I can definitely see a point in, and another one of these another one of these expat turnaround, gotcha sort of moments where I was told about a friend of mine. I don't think he's a CHEGA supporter necessarily, but he heard somebody in a bar, foreigner in a bar, saying, "Oh, I can't believe it. Portugal wants to implement all these really tough immigration policies here." And this person turned out to be an Australian. And my Portuguese friend said, you're from you're from Australia with some of the what are you talking about? Some of the toughest migration policies ever known." And it's one of those sort of spluttering moments, isn't it? For the I don't know what that device is. Is it are we expats just like moving away from the problem and not sorting it out, and then getting uncomfortable about and getting our knickers in a twist in the new place where we don't feel so politically responsible? Yet inevitably here we are having conversations of this kind. Again, I'll put that to our audience here this evening. And I suppose to own it a little bit and steer it in the way that I was hoping for this evening. What does appeal to me is what I hope to be leaving behind me in my former country was the establishment domination. Uh, Deep state, if you like. There are different words for it, aren't there? But the political establishment, to me, is more dangerous and unpleasant than shades of that over which people more obviously and noticeably argue. And so, in terms of the anti-establishment message of CHEGA, and they're not the only party with that. I think Liberal Initiative possibly a little bit anti-establishment as well. No,
I,
okay, all right. Okay, all right, fair enough. Well, then I'll ask you directly: are CHEGA the only anti-establishment party, or as you called it, I think you had a particular phrase for it earlier on, civil society? Are CHEGA the only non-civil society candidates, if you like, anti-establishment?
in Parliament, I would say so. Yes.
Okay,
You have these far left parties. They will claim to be, we are the ones who are anti-establishment because we are the
yeah,
ones who are revolutionary ones, which is true enough. But the thing is, the system is itself revolutionary. The system dates back to the April 25th revolution. So the
yeah,
system is revolutionary. The system praises revolution and radicalism. So from my point of view, the only forces in society that don't have, say, for example, an influence over civil society, be it economic or cultural or educational, is CHEGA. We're the only outsiders.
yeah,
Even the Liberal Initiative, they have enormous favor with media, the favor of the media, very influential in academia as well, lots of funding from the private sector. I don't see them as anti-establishment. Now, their economic policies are a bit different, a bit more on the liberal side, of course, but I wouldn't say they're anti-establishment. In fact, some of their members have been quite gleefully participating in these quarantines against CHEGA, these cordons sanitaires against CHEGA. So.
and by that you mean how the other parties organise themselves to block and prevent CHEGA influence. Yes, which you might expect from an establishment as an establishment response. Okay, so on that level, that's interesting to me. And then the bit that prompts the question: should foreigners fear CHEGA? And approaching this from a slightly different angle, is this whole thing of populism and what gets attracted, the emotions around politics, and the push button and the polarization. Is it a fair accusation to say that CHEGA has attracted people who who are angry about the situation, who are this makes it sounds so kind of poor us foreigners, but I think there is this has been reported to me. I think there is a noticeable change in society, and it's not 2020 anymore. It's not um, the Portugal that people experienced 10, certainly not 20 years ago, when some of the first foreigners were settling here. And there is a palpable atmosphere in the air of suspicion towards immigrants. So immigrants, foreigners here are feeling much more self-conscious, I think, or if not much more, then there is a new level of self-consciousness. Perhaps there needs to be. I don't know. That's another aspect to it. But it seems to me that there is you might be attracting antagonistic and angry people who have an axe to grind, and who basically might not be very pleasant. How that's my sense of it. What's your response?
I just think that the premise is wrong because you are putting in all the same bag all the foreigners,
Yes,
and
yes.
I think that's a mistake. And we've had the occasion to discuss this before. So let me put it this way: you are a British expat. Now you happen to live in a part of the country that is not particularly difficult or dangerous. But let's say that you would take a stroll in Oporto or in Lisbon at night. Who would you fear? Would you fear the Portuguese people who support CHEGA? Is that your primary concern when it comes to security, safety? Is that what you're thinking about? Or perhaps I should carry a knife so that I can defend myself from CHEGA supporters. Is that your main concern?
Well, it's a very good question. And to completely own it, probably not. And I was very shocked in a middle class way to see unrest on the streets of Caldas de Rainha. I think it was identifiably a particular kind of immigrant group that had come. But this is the danger we're talking about, isn't it? Because I was thinking a lot about this. The grouping of immigrants, if you like, the sort of subsection of immigrants. What we're talking about, and what I was trying to get at with manifesto and manipulation, is essentially we're talking about behaviour, aren't we? And that's the danger, isn't it? It's to talk about ethnic groups of people or countries people come from, because not everybody who comes from a country is bad. So are we not better off talking about and addressing behavior rather than getting into that territory, which is what I'm trying to allude to? And I know I haven't done it very well, but aren't we better off addressing the sort of behavior we want from immigrants in Portugal rather than focusing on the stuff that really gets people worked up and divided, which is to talk about countries and particular, group othering people, if you like, would be a way of putting it.
Well, I can tell you that I have the CHEGA program in front of me, so we can discuss that in detail if you want. And the CHEGA program does not enter into any specific discrimination. That being said, you're asking me, and I can tell you, listen, I think it's also naive to pretend that immigration coming from a certain part of the world is the exact same thing as coming from another part.
No, that's true. Absolutely.
It's a lie. It's a lie. You know it's a lie.
Yes.
And it's a lie. It's not just a lie in Portugal. It's a lie in the UK.
Yes.
I remember we had this huge kerfuffle when Trump, in his first term, compared Haitian immigrants to the US with Norwegian immigrants to the US. Yes. And his comparison was, listen, these are obviously not the same type of people coming in. And what's the point of pretending that they are? Now, that does not necessarily mean that you have to bar and ban all the Haitians from coming into the US. But why pretend that if we like diversity, then why pretend that everyone is the same? No, the world is diverse. For better or for worse, the world is diverse.
Yes.
But sometimes it's not even. Sometimes it's not even the origin. It's just the type of people coming in. So, for example, with the decolonization, plenty of Portuguese, actually over 500,000 Portuguese came to Portugal from the African colonies and India. And the integration of those people, I mean, they will tell you, the people from my mother's generation, they will say, oh my God, it was horrible, terrible time integrating, and we faced so many hardships and difficulties. Bollocks. No, they faced hardships because they came with nothing. Yeah. So you had to start life from scratch. And of course, some people were, upset that all these people were coming in from the colonies and taking up space and government resources. But there were no confrontations. There was no open hostility. It was just inconvenient for everyone involved, for the country, for the hosting country, and for the people coming.
Yes.
But the reason I mentioned this is because obviously Portuguese integrating with Portuguese is not a problem. But amongst the people that came were the colonial administrative elites. And these were black people and Indian people. They were not European or Caucasian or ethnically white, whatever you want to call them. They were ethnic people from the colonies. But the thing is, they had studied in the Portuguese educational system. So when they came to Portugal, that skin color didn't matter at all. No one treated them differently. They saw them as Portuguese, and they had Portuguese traditions. So it was not a problem to integrate them at all.
Yeah.
Big difference from the immigrants that came from the former colonies after the decolonization process.
Right.
Because those people that came starting in the 80s, 90s, they came without qualifications. They came with very different traditions. They were truly a different culture. and some of them never actually fully integrated. And they're here now, they have the nationality, but shouldn't we learn something
I won't.
from our past
Yeah,
mistakes?
Mick, I'm not going to pretend that's not a problem. That's a very interesting kind of thesis, isn't it, or theory or whatever. But a basis of successful Portuguese immigration is to share a common
It's not
culture.
even Portuguese. The same thing happened in the UK. When
Yeah,
India and
yeah,
Pakistan
fair enough.
became independent, where did
Yes,
all the local colonial elites? They didn't stay. They knew what was going to happen. They
yeah,
they, they 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 left for the UK. And when they
yes,
arrived in the UK, what was the difficulty of integrating the Indians and the Pakistanis, or well, the subcontinent elites that were already, they already spoke British English. They had studied in the British educational system.
mm,
What was the difficulty? There wasn't a difficulty.
yeah,
Now, that has absolutely nothing to do. There's no possible comparison with the people who came starting from the 90s.
yeah. But you're
Um,
talking about shared culture, aren't you? And a basic understanding, which I absolutely agree with you. That's really important with immigration and how you, I suppose, the, the CHEGA policies are an attempt to do that, although they may not be seen, or they may produce different results and be dangerous in the right or the wrong hands, if you like. But I agree with you. Shared culture is really important, and you don't want to be making huge social problems for yourself based on some, ideological laziness or shortcut. Um, and I think it is a
I think, I told you this before, but I think that the radicalism is on the other side, is in the
right.
magical thinking that once people cross the border, they magically become local citizens with a local culture. That is the risk, because that is black and white. That is Manichaean thinking. That is magical thinking.
Yes.
That's
No,
not reality.
I take your point, and how I would respond is that there are Norwegian psychopaths and rapists, and in my own British community, of migrants, there are people who don't attempt to fit in or do or adjust, and and that's why to me, um, it's a hugely. I'm not trying to reject what you're saying, but what I want to add to it is that there's a huge kind of cultural part of this along the lines of shared culture and integration that is a maybe a sort of transcendent part of migration, regardless of where people are coming from. And some people are better than others from certain nationalities. But I think it's an issue for everybody, including if I am at all a representative of British people. We also have some work to do. There are people who just come to Portugal to take advantage of the situation
There's a
and
big
not contribute.
difference. But there's
Right.
a big difference, Carl. There are, I understand what you mean. There are
Yeah.
plenty of British people who come to Portugal and they wish to remain British. I think the same could be said of Chinese people. There are Chinese
Yeah.
people who come to Portugal, they enjoy being here, but they want to remain Chinese. They want to
Yes.
keep their
Yes.
own culture. And
Yes.
listen, I think there's plenty of room for that type of person. I'm not objected to, I don't object to them coming and staying and working. But there's a big difference, and this is where I radically disagree with the left and with the establishment in Portugal.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that in terms of nationality, these people should not get nationality. It's one
Right.
thing if they get a work permit, a residence permit. It's a very
Yeah.
different thing to get the passport. And in order to get the nationality, you do have to prove that you are integrated, that you want to integrate into the national culture. Not everyone wants to.
Mm, mm.
But this is
Fair,
why
I'm
CHEGA.
with you on that. Yeah, I'm
No,
absolutely
this is
with
why I
you on that.
support CHEGA. CHEGA asks for criteria for tests to verify that these people
Prove it.
really are going to
Prove
integrate.
it, basically. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's right, absolutely right. But this conversation isn't about whether you and I agree necessarily. It's an interesting thing to do, but I've completely hogged you for 50 minutes, and there are questions from other people that I'd like to switch to now, if I may. And Jackie was first with a belter of a question. What's Shega's feelings about the World Health Organization pandemic treaty? The WEF, the World Economic Forum, which I'm guessing you weren't there this year, Miguel, and the CBDC, the digital currency, and let's add into that Portugal's attempts possibly to go into the whole digital identity thing. What? And you can't talk about Shega's feelings, can you? As you said before, you're a representative of yourself, but you might indicate what the manifesto points are on these, perhaps.
I mean, I think that our views would not be very different from Jackie's. So
Well, you get a
view
sense of
with
her, you
great
get a sense of her
skepticism.
views on this, right?
We view certainly the World Economic Forum and the WHO with great skepticism. And I can tell you that CHEGA supporters have been participating in all these online polls or online petitions to prevent Portugal from signing the WHO treaty that they were trying to approve. I was trying to find CHEGA's position on that specifically. But the WHO is not actually mentioned in the program.
Okay, fair enough. No, that's
Let me
helpful.
try. Let me try with vaccines.
I think ADN are another Portuguese political party with a similar position on that. For those who are interested as
They
well,
are much more skeptical. They are much more.
they're super skeptical, aren't they? Yeah,
Yes, 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 yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
And they produced some very interesting posters, as only Portugal knows how, when when they were presenting themselves in the
Um,
national elections.
yeah, it doesn't mention the WHO issue
I think you
specifically.
may have satisfied Jackie's answer there. We dealt with that, Adrian. Isn't there a limit to the number of terms you can be mayor? And that's been happened. I think
It's
2010.
3 terms, by the way. It's three.
Three. Okay, and you dealt with that earlier on. Okay, do you think local candidates actually get voted based on party or an individual personality? In small areas, I would assume people just know the worthiness, personality of the person, regardless. I think that's a fair point, isn't it?
I think it's a mix of both.
Okay.
Like I said, but I think on the local level, the names take on a much greater importance than on the national level.
Okay. I hear CHEGA in terms of more relevant to federal issues policies, not so much local. Are they very different to other parties on local issues? That's an interesting question. Would you know if would it be very obvious if the CHEGA representative was going to be shaking things up on a local level?
There is one thing that comes to mind that I had to deal with in my parish. We had a reform in the 2010s of local parishes, because there used to be. I mean, we're a very small country, and there used to be an enormous number of them. So I think it was still with the socialist government, they actually merged a number of them. And there are people now, sometimes it's not even a matter of party, it's just a matter of people, citizens, who would like to see that reform reversed. So to go back to the old system, separate all the different parishes. Now we have uniões de freguesia, so parish unions.
Yeah.
Whereas, for example, before 3 or 4 parishes used to be separate, now they're part of the same. They all have the same president of Junta de Freguesia.
Yes, I see that where I live. Yeah, yeah. He's got 4 or 5.
And CHEGA has, unlike other parties on the left, for example, say the communists or the far left, CHEGA has not been, in spite of being anti-establishment, mind you, but we have not been particularly favorable to going back to the old system, because our impression is it would just create more local, it would just duplicate local functions and authority and money spent. It would just feed this whole coterie of local establishments, if you will, local interests, and it would not necessarily improve the lives of citizens.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for that. Thanks for the question, Mel. Adrian, I've received some electoral manifestos municipal for Coimbra, for the Juntos Somos Coimbra's coalition, PSD, CDS, PP, Initiativa Liberal, NOS, PPM, Volt and MPT, Avançar, Coimbra, PS, Livre and PAN, and a Freguesia manifesto for PCP, PEV, and an independence list, but nothing yet from CHEGA. I think as you were saying earlier on, you're fielding candidates everywhere around the country on a local level. I get the sense that might lead to like resources being spread quite thinly as well.
I suppose. But in the case of Coimbra, I'm familiar with it because I was born in Coimbra, and I go very, very, very frequently. What happens in Coimbra is that it's a very, very adverse territory for CHEGA.
Okay.
Because it's a far left city.
Yes.
Even though they have a PSD headed local government at the moment, it took this huge coalition to do so, mind you. He was describing the number of parties that are together with
Yes.
PSD.
Yes. Yes.
So it took a huge coalition to snatch it back from the left. And it's because of the fact that it's a university city and students
Yeah.
tend to be more left wing. And so CHEGA does not really have a fertile ground in Coimbra. We elected very few local representatives in 2021, and I would like to believe that we will elect someone for the city hall, the city council. But I'm not even entirely sure that the councilman is realistic in Coimbra at this point. I hope it is. But
Right.
so for that reason, just to say that I'm sure that we have outdoors in Coimbra with our candidates. That does not necessarily mean that we'll manage to get the leaflets, the flyers, in all the mailboxes everywhere.
Yeah.
I can tell in Endeavours that was not the case. We were not
Yes.
able to do that. But people, it's not hard to find information on social media.
Sure, Adrian. If you want to know, it can be looked up. I think is the answer there. You follow Just My Opinion YouTube live streaming channel, which is pro CHEGA. One priority, which I agree with, is fighting the radical LGBT plus agenda, which some are seeking to impose. You also add, Adrian, Montenegro has been forced to eat his words about not doing any deals with CHEGA. Would you agree with that? The cordon sanitaire is not working for the Prime Minister?
Well, no, I wouldn't agree, because what was meant by doing deals with CHEGA was for a national coalition, a national ruling coalition, and Montenegro has not done that. Now, I think that the result of that, the outcome of that, and we've had the occasion, the chance to speak about this before as well, but the outcome of that is instability. I mean, we had an election in 2024, we had another 2025. You can see the scenario for the presidential elections. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had CHEGA and PSD together in a coalition, things would be much more stable. But well,
Fair enough. Okay, are you okay for maybe 10 or 20 minutes more tonight? Thank you, Mig. I did say to you before we went on air, this might be 30 minutes top, an hour tops, but this is turning into a very interesting discussion. I thank you for that. So there you go, Adrian. Mel's put this much better than I tried to. I felt that CHEGA has some worthwhile policies. Conversely, I found some CHEGA supporters have become quite vocally aggressive to immigrants of all denominations from personal experience. Now, this is an interesting thing. It's also happening in the UK, isn't it? And, we get all these broad brush, lazy, journalistic, political things. And the populist parties attract some people that are quite outspoken and perhaps unpleasant at times. But that's not to say the establishment parties don't have some deeply unpleasant individuals associated with them as well. What do you make of that comment? And would you accept it in the first place, Miguel, that the CHEGA does attract some people who are outright aggressive and perhaps nasty?
I mean, I can only say it's not been my experience. I mean, obviously, um, it depends on the type of immigrant, but specifically regarding the British community, I haven't seen anything of the sort. Perhaps also because I'm a member of CHEGA in the Lisbon district, so it would be very unlikely that people in the Lisbon district would expect, even on the right, for all the foreigners to go. I mean, Lisbon has always been cosmopolitan, so
Yes, yes.
perhaps in the countryside there are some more reactionary people who are genuinely xenophobic. I don't know.
I think it does happen.
I've seen this sort of let's say confrontational attitude towards foreigners, but not against all foreigners, just against certain ethnicities. That I've seen,
Yes.
sure.
Okay, yeah, and as I said, this is happening in the UK as well, and it's much better documented as well, of course, isn't it? The it tends to be, and this is not an apology or an excuse for bad behaviour in populist parties, but the bad behaviour in establishment parties is much better hidden, I think, or distracted from, is it not? Some of us consider ourselves to be immigrants, not expats. The idea of expat sounds like someone who doesn't really want to integrate, glad to live in a village with only 4 foreigners. Real. How many Portuguese people live there, though? Is it 2 Portuguese people and 4 foreigners, Adrian? A warm good evening to you, gentlemen. Hi, Squire of the Shires. Denby, hi to you both. Question from Miguel. What is your view on LGBTQ plus rights and women's abortion rights? Often I have heard extreme views from CHEGA supporters. Curious to hear your thoughts. Obrigado. And this is part of the same sort of conversation, isn't it? People with such, well, I was going to say strong views, but particularly polar views might be attracted towards CHEGA. What's your view on this? According to Denby's question to you there.
Okay, listen, I'm a member of a conservative party. I'm not particularly keen on those types of policies. In fact, this past weekend, I participated in a march for the children's rights, and what was meant by that march, of course, was basically to fight against the LGBT indoctrination in schools, which is real and which has horrendous consequences, Carl. We are having the same problems that they're having in California and America here, except that in America it is denounced, it is fought politically, and in Portugal it has no visibility. There are children, and mind you, these are children, some of them are on the autistic spectrum, others have Down syndrome, there's a greater proportion of those, also regular children, who are indoctrinated in schools to think that all their problems will disappear if they change sex. And then they actually blackmail their parents, emotionally and otherwise, into paying for these surgeries, which have horrendous results. Most of them regret them, and there is no turning back. And you know who favors this? Yes, here in Portugal. And some of the operations are done here. And for the people who have the financial ability to not have to wait for the Portuguese healthcare system, they go to Turkey to have these operations, which are not safer environments, I can tell you. And then they come back, and our national healthcare system has to then take it into account and pay for the consequences, the nasty consequences of these operations. And no one's talking about this. No Portuguese TV will talk about this. There are some publications, mostly online, that will discuss it. The TV will not discuss it. So no, I do not have a very favorable view. This is the politicization and sexualization of children in schools. These children are teenagers, they're underage children, and this goes on with the explicit support of school psychologists and many teachers. Not in every school, not every teacher, but it happens. For example, one of the things that I find egregious is that on the Ministry of Education website, they have a special section for the LGBT NGO. Why is that? Why don't other NGOs get their own little page in the National Education Ministry website?
Mm-hmm.
Also, this goes on. There are visits that NGOs conduct to schools to indoctrinate the children even more, as if the manuals were not enough. And I'd just like to know, imagine that the Mormon church wanted to go to schools and evangelize. Are they allowed to do that? I don't think so. They made it a big point of removing all the crosses, all the crucifixes from schools, but the LGBT, the rainbow crowd, they get to go there and indoctrinate and evangelize. Why?
Well, we'll leave that question hanging there. And also, I was going to ask you why the TV won't touch it. Do you think? Is it just too difficult an issue? Would they find themselves in too much hot water? Why do you think the mainstream media of Portugal aren't covering that if it's occurring here in this country?
The left, my guess, because they support these policies, they don't care about the outcomes. They just support them because they're politically correct and they believe in the ideology. The right, because probably they would be afraid of what organizations such as the UN and the EU might say if they were to attempt to remove them.
Wow. Okay, thank you for your analysis on that. Denby, I hope that satisfies your question there. Adrian, sounds like the Le Pen, Front National, AFD, MSI, etc., shunning treatment. There have been foreign communities in Portugal since at least medieval times, including English, Spanish, and German. I'm not sure the point you're making there. Well, there's Miguel. I love you. I don't know if you're expecting That's a night. Okay. We like Miguel. There's a big difference between the legal and illegal. Likewise, their intentions and motivations. Starmer the Harmer, not a popular man at the moment, is now trying to restrict full fat. But bugger cola, CHEGA won't limit our. Okay, a question: are you going to restrict people's diets?
I have not heard that.
I can't imagine.
I cannot find the word sugar in our program. I,
Well, thank God for that. I mean, that tells you something, doesn't
I
it?
don't know.
That alone, a lack of inclusion tells you as much as inclusion sometimes. Sheikh has called for an end to 50 years of compadre. I don't know what that is. I mean, União de Freguesia imposed from Lisbon. Trouble is, the boundaries of this and two other freguesias run through the middle of the village. What is the end of the compadre? What is that, Miguel?
Computer just means nepotism and corruption.
Oh, well, that doesn't sound like a terrible demand, does it? I don't suppose. Okay, that's radical.
And I think
What
that the previous comment was referring to the fact that Portugal has always had foreign communities. So we've
Yes,
had the British for many centuries. I'm
yeah.
not so sure about Germans. There were some Dutch that immigrated, especially from the 16th century. There were some Dutch present, but mostly Italians. We had a big Italian community in Lisbon.
Mm.
One of our churches here, it's a pretty church in Chiado, was under the jurisdiction of Rome directly.
Was it? Wow, it has its feelers everywhere, does it not? What is your view on the recent changes in how landlords and tenants are taxed? Also, what's CHEGA on a federal scale, I have to say? And I'll add something to this, if I may. Somebody said to me at our meetup today, our expat foreigner immigrant meetup, you choose whichever word you like, because I don't really mind. But the rent control, the CHEGA were proposing to end rent control and the rent rises being in line with inflation. Is that? Can we fact check that with you tonight?
Uh, can you repeat?
Yes, that last bit, and I've completely dominated Ben's question, which we'll come back to here. But someone said at lunchtime that, well, to put it into perspective, in context, your rental agreement allows your landlord to put the rent up in line with inflation each year, and only that. They can't just slap a great big increase on your rent. And it was suggested that CHEGA were going to do away with that.
We have there's without reading the whole program, there would be a tendency from CHEGA, from the right, to agree rather more. There are two NGOs, two associations, one defending landlords and the other one tenants. So we would tend to agree more with the landlords because the law has been drafted by the left for decades, and so it provides tenants with exceptional exemptions and rights and privileges, to the extent that it is extremely difficult to evict people from houses. So say they stop paying the rent, it takes months to evict
I
them.
understand that. I understand
Sometimes years if they decide to fight it in courts, years. It's exceptionally difficult to do so. And so both because we have a pro-market position, but also just out of sheer fairness, we would tend to side more with the landlords association. But on that specific issue, I cannot say. I would have to look into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping not. I think that's among the more sane um, landlord tenancy agreements.
There used to
It
be
seems
one
fair.
law. I'm not sure if it's still on the books, but there used to be one law that after 65, or 75, you couldn't evict the person,
Oh,
because
okay.
they were considered an elderly person, so you could
Yeah.
not evict them. So sometimes you would have to wait decades to be able to take control of the
Yes.
property again.
And this is an interesting point, isn't it? Just generally, that when a law, an ass of a law, has been in place for years, a bold sweep comes in to reform things, which is perhaps overzealous in its. And I'm asking specifically about what I think is a fair matter, which is to put rent up in line with inflation, plus or more minus an amount, but not just completely take away any limitation on that. I guess if you're saying you're pro market, it's up to between the landlord and the tenant. And I take your point completely. I mean, one of our co-hosts here on the Good Morning Portugal show, their family are landlords, and they've got people paying rents of €15 a month. So it costs them to house people, and that's clearly ridiculous. Nobody except the person paying €15, I suspect, would
If
think
you're
that's
a foreigner, you will have noticed that in Portuguese cities, in the city centers, there are plenty of decaying buildings.
yeah,
And the reason for that, there's two reasons. One reason is that our inheritance laws are very, very, again, they provide so many rights to the heirs that sometimes if you have several brothers or well, heirs to the property, and if one person does not agree, then nothing can be done with the property. So
yeah,
that's one problem. The other problem is that some rents are not allowed to be increased by the landlord, and so they also cannot afford to renovate or restore the buildings. So
yeah. I mean, at that level, it is ridiculous, and it takes some sensible, like on your T-shirt, it takes some common sense, doesn't it, to be applied to this situation? No question. Sorry, Ben, you were asking originally before I hijacked that question. What is your view on the recent changes in how landlords and tenants are taxed? I don't know if you're aware of them. Do we just take it pro market suggests CHEGA's?
I would have to look into it
Yeah.
specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Ben. We'll come back to that though. Miguel may come back. And on that note, representatives from other parties always happy to speak to people from any political party to go beyond our algorithm. So if there's anyone who wants to propose, suggest, or connect us with somebody, we're happy to do that. I felt it much more vocalized and direct. And yes, I don't consider myself an expat but an immigrant, trying to integrate, but have noticed much more aggression in the past 5 years, perhaps the way of the world as well. I'm not making excuses, Mel, at all, but we have a global atmosphere, don't we? Which I think we're subject to as well. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Portuguese here in the village. Immigrant is someone from outside the village. You're welcome. Portugal is great for religious freedom. No true Orthodox Christian genocide here. Okay, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. We should perhaps wrap up now and give you a last word or two. I wish you well, not from a sort of party political point of view, but to all those public servants or would-be public servants taking part in the Portuguese local elections on Sunday. Good on you for wanting to represent your community, and good luck to you. And I hope you and your communities get what they need for a functional and happy society at that local level here in Portugal. Last word from you, Miguel, if you will.
I would say, from my point of view, I certainly don't think that foreigners like you need to fear CHEGA. That being said, obviously we're very much in disagreement with the current immigration policy, and we would have a very different approach, a much more strict approach, both to immigration. We would impose quotas, and also to nationality laws. We would also be far more restrictive on those. I don't think I'm giving anyone any news. This is what you would expect from a conservative party.
Yes.
So fear, no. Even if you don't want to integrate in Portugal, I don't think you should fear CHEGA. But there is clearly a paramount distinction to be made between, say, European foreign communities and foreign communities from areas of the world that have very different cultures from ours. And I would say, just from my own personal point of view, the purpose here with CHEGA and with similar parties is to not repeat the mistakes that Northern Europe made. And they are being repeated in Portugal stupidly. And we would wish to avoid that. Now, if you can look at Northern Europe and you see all the problems with terrorism, with lack of integration, with insecurity, and you don't see any problems, then, well, I don't know what to tell you.
And that was going to be a last word, but I've got one more thing I'd like to put to you. The people who are glad to be here, whatever they call themselves, expats, foreigners, immigrants, and really appreciate. And actually, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The way you put the question to me before, you've come from a place where you didn't like it. Why would you allow the same political forces to persist that created the situation you want to get away from? Is there a mechanism? Is there a process for for those of us who absolutely love and are drawn to and are sort of soaking ourselves in a Portuguese culture we love and traditions we love, is there a formal way of like associating with that, being part of the political process? Because I think that's quite a useful thing at this time. For I know of no foreigners, immigrants, estrangeiros association that represents the massive foreign population in this country that is saying, yes, we love much of this culture and many of the traditions, and we would like to be publicly seen to be upholding, celebrating, and being the continuation of that. How would that work? Is there anyone doing anything of that kind?
I think that you yourself are on the right track, because I think the people who move to the countryside are forced to interact with the Portuguese society much more, and
Yeah.
and you have the choice of obviously integrating and following the local traditions or not. It's up to you. I have relatives in a small village in the countryside of Portugal. And one of my relatives is a cousin. She immigrated to Belgium, then she came back, and many of her local friends are people who she can communicate with, not in Portuguese. So they're either Dutch speakers or English speakers, whatever it may be. And so those people who live in the countryside, they go to, say, celebrations or birthdays at each other's places, and some of these people are having they're foreign, so that they have a foreign birthday party, but they also go to Portuguese homes for Portuguese birthday parties. And I think if you interact with your local community, and I know that Portuguese people are not necessarily, they're welcoming, but they're not the easiest to connect to. Sometimes they're
Private.
welcoming, but not.
Yes,
You know
that's
what I
right.
mean?
Yes, there is a
They can
sense of
be standoffish to a deeper extent,
yes.
in a deeper way. So I know that sometimes it's not the easiest, but I think that if you move to the countryside and you cooperate with your local community and you interact with them, my experience is they welcome you with open arms, and they will have you in their homes, and that's the way to do it. Now, if you come to be a digital nomad in a big city and you have no intention of integrating, that's fine too, obviously, but then you're not a Portuguese. That's all I would say.
Yes. Well, let's make that our last note there, like a nod towards the culture we love and arguably would like to preserve and remain special here. Thanks so much, Miguel, for taking the time out to be with us. And I hope people get to enjoy what's been discussed here and add to it in the comments, if you will. Thank you very much. And good luck to you on Sunday.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll leave it there. We've got no
An honor and a pleasure.
we've got no AI generated tune to play like all the political parties seem to have this year. I don't know if you did that on your territory, but we'll go with this. We'll go with this round of applause from the Squire of the Shires. And thanks very much, Miguel. Take care. Bye for now. Ciao, ciao.
In Portugal, there's a YouTube show full of fun facts you need to